Hey everyone, welcome to the Trial Site News podcast. I'm Dr. Erin, your host, and today we have a very special guest, Brad Hunstable. Brad, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I could introduce you. You're CEO, you're a West Point graduate, which I know something about too. Yeah, maybe just for our followers who don't know anything about you, maybe say a little bit about yourself, and then I'll say what we're going to talk about today.
Okay. I'm a kid that grew up in Texas, a little small town out of Fort Worth. I did go to West Point. We knew each other, and that was an incredible experience. Did the Army thing for 5 years after West Point. And after that, I ended up starting an internet company called Ustream. Ironically, I did video and live streaming and podcasts, and I actually got Joe Rogan to start his podcast, believe it or not. And so I did that for 10 years and I sold it to IBM. And after that, I started another company, which I'm currently running, which does electric motors, trying to solve the electrification challenge and, end human suffering through better energy solutions. And then most importantly, I'm a husband and I'm a dad. I got three kids.
So today we're going to talk about your son Hayden and your experience. And I know this is not an easy topic. And for our viewers, Brad, let's just start out. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your son Hayden?
Yeah, so my son Hayden is my middle child. He was an incredible boy, loved football, vibrant, he was very social. I would say a leader, a really good heart, great person. I've got two other kids. I've got an 18-year-old daughter, and then a 10-year-old daughter. So he was the middle one. And what the topic of this discussion is obviously about is how we lost him. And April 17th of 2020, during the middle of the pandemic, the lockdown, like everybody, we were scared to death. We all kind of thought it was a zombie apocalypse. We wouldn't even let our kids go outside. And it was a beautiful sunny day, and my water well had broke, and Hayden helped me. My dad came over. I hadn't seen him because of the pandemic, and I couldn't fix the water. We needed water, so he came over. He's really handy. And Hayden, my dad fixed it, and I kissed him on his head and one last time. He went upstairs, and that day changed everything. And a little background for it, tell you kind of what happened. In Christmas of 2019, he had got a computer monitor, big nice computer monitor. It's what he wanted for Christmas. I think it was like February of 2020, something like that. He came down and told me he broke his monitor on accident. He got mad at this game called Fortnite, threw his controller down. Very common response, unfortunately, from a lot of kids, and a lot of very common game people were playing. And I told him, you're not going to get another one. I don't care about the monitor, but I do care how you react. And so too bad, so sad kind of deal. And he took it all right, I guess. And then the pandemic happens and the lockdown happens. And that was the only way he could communicate with his friends. We weren't letting our kids even go outside, right or wrong, jump on the trampoline. We're scared to death of the DoorDash guy, kind of deal. And so we made the decision to let him get another one. We got a little cheapo so he could play and interact with his friends and that kind of stuff, because he wasn't going to school and there wasn't school. And on that day, he went upstairs and on accident broke it again. And a 30-minute window, I took a phone call. My little 8-year-old daughter came downstairs and said Hayden hung himself. And I ran upstairs, tried to save him. Tried to limit as much as I could of my 8-year-old daughter's involvement in that, but I need her to go get me the phone. And she had brought me the AED. I happened to have an AED, an automatic electronic defibrillator in the house, and administered CPR. Just went through that whole process, and he was gone. We missed it by, I don't know, a minute or 5 minutes, I don't know. And the reason I'm not crying, although I've cried many times, I cried this morning, and I can talk about this, is about 2 days after we buried him. And by the way, for context, I didn't know nothing about suicide, even though we had been in the military, and I knew vets were taking their life. I didn't know anything about suicide. In fact, I thought suicide was probably had the same stigma most people, which was those crazy people or drug users. It was kind of my sense. And 2 days after we buried Hayden, I recorded a video on Facebook, and it was just, I just wanted to, just one, get some stuff off my chest, and two, just talk to the community, because there were starting to be some rumors, and just, you know, tell everybody what happened. And I started the video off by saying, COVID killed my son, but not in the way you think. And I said, the human condition is not to be socially isolated. And then I told the story of how it was just this perfect storm of, you know, gaming and breaking a monitor and COVID. And it was 4 days before his 13th birthday. He was going to get a new computer controller. I think he thought he ruined his birthday. We were going to allow him to have one friend over, ruin his connection to his friends, didn't want to come tell me. All these things combined into a perfect storm. And he made a decision that was impulsive. From that point on, it went viral. The video wasn't my intention by any means. Obviously, it was a charged time. People were all scared. We were all worried about our kids. People were seeing the same traits in their kids that I described in the video. 150 million people watched it, and I realized that I wanted to be, you know, part of the solution, and maybe, you know, my son's. Can we take something that was so tragic and so painful for us, and maybe save some other people? And if we can, then his death, at least in some small manner, mattered. He mattered to me, but he mattered to maybe other people. And so we made a movie I'm very proud about, called Almost 13. It actually just won a Telly Award, which is kind of like winning an Oscar, a short film, I should say, not a movie. And we talk about how to safely have the conversation about suicide with your child. And so I know this is a very long-winded answer, but long and short is, now I'm very much into trying to solve this. I'm very passionate about youth suicide, second leading cause of death in 10 to 17-year-olds, which is just mind-boggling. And mental health in general is a deep passion of mine.
So I saw that video, and the reason it went viral is because it resonated with so many people and parents. And so I think that's why it went viral. People understood where you were coming from, and you could feel your pain through that video. I mean, it was just it was heart-wrenching. When you talk about you know, this perfect storm, I mean, and I know it's been a little over a year. I mean, is that how you still feel? And you mentioned and a lot of people don't know or think about suicide and kids. I mean, that's definitely hasn't been on my radar. I mean, I don't have kids, but I'm an aunt, but I don't think about that either. So I don't think you're alone in that at all. But I know when you talked about this, you know, and in the video, it was kind of like this perfect storm. And I said, yeah, I can totally see that. Is that how you still feel?
It is. And look, when I recorded the video, I'm a lot more knowledgeable now about this subject. And I've navigated to everyone at the top of Congress and the Mental Health Caucus, to every major expert I could find in the world. I've talked to them, got to know them, every organization. So what I know now is different than what I know then. But I think generally what my sense was correct, even in the immediate aftermath of losing my son, which is, one, suicide is complicated. It's usually never one thing. It's usually a perfect storm of a set of all sorts of different things that can happen. And what's particularly worrisome, in my opinion, about youth suicide in particular, kids, for two reasons. One, parents can't even fathom that their kid can actually do this. Most parents, you know, it's unfathomable. Why would a kid do that? I mean, there's stories, I've talked to people of 5-year-olds and 8-year-olds taking their life. How's that even possible? So that's one, parents can't fathom it. And two, you know, the youth today are not the same as, they're different than when we were. They're going through different things. And so, you know, in social media and gaming and parents on gaming and parents on social media and broken families, all these things, it's a different world than even when I grew up. And so I still believe that. I'll give you a couple of interesting stats. Again, second leading cause of death of 10 to 14, 15 to 24 25 to 34. Second leading cause, maybe number one this year in certain categories. I mean, if you combine overdoses in youth, it's the number one. Those two are very closely linked, drug use and, you know, suicide in some ways, because they usually have some kind of escape mechanism of pain. But in youth, the scary stat is this. About 50% of youth suicides had no previous medical diagnosis. Not to say they don't have some sort of medical issue, but there was not a true medical diagnosis. And about 55% of those are what they call impulsive suicides. And so what that typically looks like is, I broke my monitor, didn't went to my parents. I got in a fight with my parents, broke up with a girlfriend, broke up with a boyfriend. Very common one is bullying. Sometimes if someone is you know, gay or lesbian or whatever, and they want to come out, you know, they struggle with that and they take their life. And so there's some themes around impulsive suicide. And what the data shows is about 70% of those youth suicides, they made the decision within the last hour, and about 45% of them made it within the last 5 minutes. So it's an impulsive thing. And again, in about half of the situation that we can tell. And the reason for that, if you look at the medical history, if you talk to the experts, is that, you know, a kid doesn't have the prefrontal cortex fully developed like we should. Hopefully we do, but that doesn't happen until you're 24, 25, 27, whatever it may be, 23. And so they make decisions with the amygdala, that fight or flight response in many occasions. And you layer in a perfect storm, maybe in Hayden's case, probably gaming too much, maybe stayed up too late, so he's a little tired. You layer in, and other kids might have been trauma, might have been, you know, all these different things, and you get a fight or flight response decision to make the pain go away, even if it's just temporarily, and to make more out of it than what it is. And that's really scary. And the movie we made, Almost 13, which is on YouTube, it's also on Tubi, it's on wellbeings.org, amongst others. We talk about the importance of having the conversation with your child about it very directly, and how to do that in a safe and appropriate manner, and why it's important. Because impulsive suicide means you would maybe not see any signs. There might have been signs, there might not have been any signs. And so my sense that when it happened, and I tried to articulate that in the original viral video, I've obviously learned more about the science and the data since then, but I still believe that, and it seems to me to be a trend that I've seen. I've talked to hundreds of families who have lost their kids since Hayden died. Very similar pattern.
Yeah, and not many people, that's like an important statistic that can save a life, and not many people know that. I mean, yeah, I did not know that.
I tell people, we have little cards printed for haydenscorner.org, which is his foundation thing we formed. And on the back of it, it says, did you know the number 2 killer of kids is suicide, 10 to 14-year-olds. And I tell parents, if you knew that was the second most likely way your kid could die, would you do anything different as a parent? And in our case, we never talked to Hayden about it. And, you know, he would say things, and sometimes we thought it was just normal teenage things like, I shouldn't be a part of this family, or y'all don't love me, or things like that. And sometimes it was impulsive statements. And were those signs? You know, does every teenager sometimes say that? A lot of them do. Does it mean the kid's killing himself if they say that? I don't know. Yeah. But, you know, what we didn't do is sit down very directly and say, Hayden, if you have those feelings, have you ever thought about killing yourself? Have you ever thought about suicide? You actually say the word suicide. Because if you have, my expectation is that you tell me. I need to know. I need to know how you feel. I need to know if something happens to you. I want you to come tell me. You understand that? And you have that conversation. We didn't do that. We talked about that again in the movie. And I think that's what every parent in this country, every teacher, I wish we taught teachers would do this more. I wish pediatricians would have the same question to kids, church leaders. They need to ask the question very directly. And it's an uncomfortable conversation, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is uncomfortable, but it's important. It needs to be direct.
Well, the reason it needs to be direct, I'll tell you, a little bit of what I've learned and what little bit we know, particularly about impulsive suicide. Now, if your kid says the word suicide, let me say this. If your kid says, I want to kill myself, you need to take it serious. It's serious. And what does that mean? You need to get in counseling, you need to make some phone calls, you need to talk to people who are experts and take it serious, because no one says it if they don't actually have thought about it. That is a misconception. And I've talked to parents who said, well, they would tell their kid, well, they don't think like that. That's the wrong way to think. Don't know what you're saying that word. Don't think like that. Don't ever do that. You can never do that. We love you too much. Get it. Probably not the right way to have the conversation. The right way to have that conversation, even if they've said it or if they haven't said it, is to say, look, I need to know how you feel. Because if I know how you feel, we can solve this together. There's no problem we can't solve if I know. If I don't know, I can't help you. And then if I'm not around, my expectation is you tell a trusted adult, you tell a teacher, your grandmother, tell a trusted adult. And then the key thing is heaven forbid, if you're alone and you have those thoughts, okay, what you want to then do is get them in a dialogue and say, well, what can you do? What can we do to soothe ourselves in those moments? Let's get some ideas. You actually try to get a discussion going with them back and forth of their ideas. Can kick a soccer ball, write a poem, read a book, whatever. And what you're doing with what we believe in the science is showing is you may be giving them a way out when they have that fight or flight response, which means they kind of black out and they go want to do something impulsive. You created potentially some neural pathways and role played the situation. You kind of give them an out. I've thought through this. You think about West Point back in the day. Plans are worthless, but planning is everything. It's kind of the same thing. You're creating some planning, and you may give them a way out in that moment, a little bit of light they can follow because you had the conversation. I've got several stories I can tell you of how it saved some kids already because they did that.
So I watched the Almost 13 documentary. It's beautiful. It's well done. And I think it can help a lot of people for sure. You can also get it on haydenscorner.org, which is the website you guys set up, you and your family. And you mentioned two critical issues on there that you are taking on, one being resilience classes, and you want to see them in schools, resilience classes. So let's start with that. Can you talk more about that and why you think that's important?
So in this country, my opinion, we've spent the last 20 years teaching kids what's called core curriculum. There's nothing wrong with that. Math, science, all good stuff, social studies, whatever it might be. And it seems like it feels to me in most school districts, we lost probably the most important skill that we can teach a kid, which is how to live and how to think correctly, how to be resilient, how to be mindful. And some kids might get that from good parenting. Some kids might get that from church, maybe some athletics or some great teachers, but it's fragmented. So school districts teach some of this stuff, but it's just not consistent throughout the country. And what we know is happening across the world is a massive sociological experiment, in my judgment, because of this thing right here, and video gaming in general, and what it's doing to baseline dopamine levels in our youth. And so when you have, again, a perfect storm of all these things happening, and they don't have the fundamental tools of resilience at their disposal, you get tragedy, you get depression, you get anxiety, and these things can compound and create a self-fulfilling prophecy in a cycle. And so I would like to see Congress pass I think we need a national Marshall Plan type thing for this mental health in our youth epidemic. I mean, a deliberate, spend the money and do it at multiple levels and multiple phases. And one phase, the way to do that, one avenue of the approach of this multi-front war is teaching resilience systematically in schools. I'm talking what I believe it's a class. It starts at kindergarten. You go up through K through 12. And I'll give you an example. When we went to West Point, my thought when we were going to the academy was, I'll never be a good leader. I'm not a good leader because I wasn't born a good leader. I honestly thought that in my head. And what you learn, as you know, when you go to West Point, is leadership is not an art. You're not born with it. It is a science, and it can be learned. There are principles and there's data, and if you practice it, you can get better. Now, is there degrees of leadership based on some natural ability? Of course, but anybody can become a good leader if you follow the principles and you apply the principles and you practice. I mean, this is true. Resilience is the same way. Kids are not born resilient. This can be taught. And so what I argue to people is in class, and imagine you're in kindergarten class and you have their attention, and teachers are still heroes at this point in a lot of ways. And we start this at a very young age, and we teach them the basic skills. For instance, all right, let's talk about bullying. Has anybody in here ever been bullied? And you actually role play. What can we do? Let's talk. How could we react? How should we react to when a bully? Think about what just happened right up the street from me in Arlington when the kid brought the gun in because he was bullied. That's not the right response, clearly. I'm not, so what's a better way to handle that? And you start these dialogues at a young age, and you're role playing, just like it when we were at the academy, we role played leadership, same thing. The other thing I tell people is you can give kids these tools about positive thinking, about mental loops that we get into, which causes anxiety, which is a lot of anxiety is fear of the future, and you're getting yourself into this mental loop. But you imagine, we taught this to we taught kindergartners just basic breath work. Why breath work? Well, we know breath work can calm you. The example I use, when you're in a basketball game and you're in high school or college and you're about to shoot, or NBA player, you're at a free throw line, you're going to shoot the winning goal to shoot at the championship. You're at the free throw line. What do you do right before you shoot? You bounce the ball and you go like this. And then you shoot. Everybody does that. Everybody does that. And the reason is it calms you. And there are so many of these techniques that I would call, before this new agey and voodoo, that are real, that's backed by science, that we could teach kids and give them a tool for the rest of their life. And so I think resilience and even education, guys, why should we not be on our phone right before we go to bed? What's the science behind what it's doing to you chemically? There's this guy named, people should watch him, Andrew Huberman. I don't know if you watch his podcast, it's fantastic. He just had one on dopamine, so much of what kids, if you understood the science, we teach kids why being on this 24/7, constantly looking at is
Absolutely
your dopamine levels.
Yeah.
It masks itself as anxiety, depression, and ADHD.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of science showing how disruption in sleep and lack of sleep, poor sleep it affects your cognitive abilities, depression, anxiety, all of that. And even the slightest blue light, the slightest light from your phone, from our laptops, keeps melatonin from doing its thing, the vampire hormone, and we're not getting good night's sleep. And that's happening to kids. They sleep with their phones and they're constantly on, they're on all the time. So I noticed it with myself. I mean, that's why I always say sleep like a cave person. Everything, like no lights, nothing, no technology, keep it out. And
if you wake up at 3 a.m, don't turn your phone on and check your Facebook,
right.
Your Snapchat,
Yeah.
Your TikTok.
Yeah.
We know
Yeah.
that light at those certain times of the day just completely disrupt your chemical balance, particularly dopamine, and that baseline dopamine drops, and it's just bad.
Yeah. And we're still learning. I think we're still learning the impact that technology is going to have, because they're using it at younger and younger ages. I mean, you can't even walk down the sidewalk in New York City, everybody's like this, like everybody. It's weird at all ages, Well,
and this, another thing goes back to kind of tie it all in back to the conversation you got to have your kid about suicide. When your kid brings you something to talk to you about their feelings, you got to acknowledge it and get off your phone. I catch myself doing this as well. I mean, because it's tough. How do you help? We've created a bunch of addicts, and it's an addict trying to help an addict. The mom's an addict, the dad's an addict, the kid's an addict. Addicts can't help addicts. And so we got to break this cycle. And when your kid does come to you and you're doing this, and even if it's not about suicide, something about how they feel, and you dismiss it, well, you just taught them that, well, I don't bring anything to my mom and dad, they're not going to care. And then when it really matters, and at some point I want to tell you a story of a lady, of how it saved her life. And so this is real.
Absolutely. Now, does this tie into your other cause listed on haydenscorner.org is about gaming and responsible gaming? I don't know much about gaming at all. So tell me what that's about.
Well, I grew up as a gamer. I grew up playing Nintendo, and I'd call myself an avid gamer in many ways back then. And games have evolved a lot in the last 20 years. They're very immersive. They're very real. Uh, Many of these gaming companies have psychologists on staff as well to keep people engaged. They call it engagement. Engagement, aka, means how do we give people a spike in dopamine? Same thing in many ways. And these games are very reward centered psychologically. And the gaming community too can be tough on people. Bullying happens. I mean, it's. I tell people nothing wrong. I'm not anti-gaming, but I think they have a moral, certainly a civic duty to help us raise our kids better and keep people informed about what are the downsides of this, of being on the game all day. What are the downsides of some of the interactivity that's happened. It's kind of like a Hollywood movie that can bully you, a Hollywood movie that can rape you eventually and kill you and come get you. These things happen. If nothing else, and then we know it can have an impact again on baseline dopamine levels, and it's certainly a form of addiction because of those peaks. And so I believe, and I'd like to see the gaming community make some changes, both in terms of education and just smart policy changes, and supervision, safety, and all these sort of things. And there's some doing it, most aren't. The dollar is a very powerful force, unfortunately, and so I'm very passionate about that. I can't speak too much about what we have going on there, but there's more coming, and I think it is analogous to TikToks and social media. Anything where our youth are spending that much engagement time with rises in significant pleasure sensors needs to be looked at very hard. And if they are not going to do the right thing, that's when someone has to step in, usually the government.
You mentioned that you've talked to other parents and families. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, I can't imagine this process that you've gone through, you and your family, at all. And I mean, grief is a strange thing. It's very unique to each person. But you mentioned, do people reach out to you? I mean, are you hearing similar stories like yours?
Yeah, grief is interesting. It's different for everybody. Everybody grieves in different ways at different speeds, even within your own family. Kids, adults, it's all different. And for me, I have found a lot of healing in educating other parents who, just like we're doing today about suicide, and maybe driving awareness and trying to raise awareness and lower the stigma. But I've also found a tremendous amount of healing in talking to parents who've been through my situation. And so after Hayden died, and with the virality of the video, and then even almost 13, I think now is at 1 million views across all platforms. Yeah, I was getting not every situation, everyone in the country, but it seems like most of them, someone they pass it to me. So I have a pretty broad awareness of what's happening, and either the family reaches out, someone introduces me to family, or I become aware of it and I reach out to the family. And, I take enjoyment and because someone did it for me, kind of Jason Reed, who has a movie about his son, is helping, just telling my grief journey to other families and just being there. Because there's something about seeing someone who's gotten through it and say, okay, you know what, I'm going to be okay. And that first month, 2 months, certainly the first days, it is a complete fog. You do not know up from down. I can't even explain it. It is indescribable. When this happens so immediate and unexpected, there was no mental prep time. And in my case, I know for a fact there for a while I had PTSD from what I saw and experienced, and that's the normal reaction. So I've learned a lot. Found all kinds of great tools and resources and experimented. Man, I've tried everything on myself, and so I've got my own sort of found what works for me. And I like just to share that with families, and I get healing. And then I also like it when I get a lot of people who reach out to me. Like I just talked with Dad right before we came on, who said my son or daughter said suicide. Now what? And again, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not an expert, but I, to the extent I can help point them in directions, I enjoy that. One story I was going to tell you, I had a guy reach out to me on Facebook in July of last year. And he said, because of your video, Brad, I sat down with my daughter. We say conversations matter. You got to have the conversation. And he said, I sat down with my daughter and found out she was suicidal, depressed, and I had no idea. So thank you. I want to thank you, because if I had not sat down, I wouldn't know. And I said, that's great. Now you know. Wouldn't you rather know than not know? So sitting down, I did a tough thing. He had the conversation. And he turned around me a couple months later and he said, Brad, I got to tell you, my daughter tried to kill herself. And I was like, what? And he said, she took a bunch of pills. She's in the ICU. She's been unconscious for 4 days in a coma, full organ failure. We don't think she's going to make it. And I was just like, God, dang, doubting everything that I intuitively believe, which is you had to have the conversation. Like, maybe I was wrong. And, it really struck me. But anyways, I prayed, miracle, modern medicine, prayer, who knows? She made it. And she's got a tough road ahead of her. But he called me about a month after that. He said, Brad, I want to call and thank you for saving my daughter's life. And I said, man, that's really nice. But, I didn't save your daughter's life. But then I appreciate the gesture. He said, no, I didn't tell you something. He goes, what I didn't tell you is the last minute my daughter came down the stairs and said, Daddy, I did something wrong. And if I had not had those conversations, I think I would have found my daughter dead in her room. So the process of talking about this is very uncomfortable. And this is real life. And in a world where all these things we're talking about have raised what I call the sort of the risk level of everyone's suicide level, certainly everyone's mental health based on the data, it's even more important that you do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think about the opioid epidemic, and that's gotten so much worse during the COVID pandemic. And of course, that's tied into all sorts of overdose issues, suicide issues. And you're right. Like this isolation, the social isolation, like having only our phones and laptops to kind of like communicate with the outside world. That isn't healthy. You don't need to be a doctor to know that isn't healthy. For sure.
And I'll tell you first off, no one wants to die. People want to escape pain. I'm telling you right now, no one wants to die. I'm good friends with Kevin Hines. Kevin Hines jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge to kill himself. He said, the second I let go of the bridge, I did not want to die. No one wants to die. They're trying to escape pain. And the same thing with the drug overdose. I'm good friends with, we've lost several in our town. This lady named Rachel, which Lies for Luke, is what her foundation's called. He died of one-time fentanyl overdose. Found him in his room. Their wedding anniversary. They were dancing that morning for breakfast. Him and another boy taking lace Xanax of some sort, and he was dead. And why do people do drugs? To me, I always, particularly, hard drug use. It's a vicious cycle. Again, dopamine related in many ways, but it's escaping pain. It's a slow form of suicide. These things are close. That's a despair. They're very closely related in terms of what happens in many cases. So it's we need a Marshall Plan. This needs to be a Manhattan Project level, not the Manhattan Project, but that level of investment by us as society. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to wrangle the horses to be able to pull that off quite yet. Right? There's a lot of good things happening though that I'm excited about, particularly on the medical front, positive, things like some of the psychedelic research that are interesting. But there's a lot that needs to happen at many levels to fix this. It's not one solution.
I agree. And I think, while things definitely need to happen at like a bigger level, I think community initiatives, grassroots initiatives, personal stories, art, using, creating documentaries, all that stuff is so powerful, right? Because it really resonates with people in ways, that sometimes listening to a doctor, reading something, a medical fact sheet doesn't do it.
No doubt, no doubt. And when I say Marshall Plan, I'm talking about all levels. I mean, a mobilization of society at all levels of government, all levels of organization, down to the one-on-one conversation. I love that story of the starfish. I tell people all the time, if you ever heard it, boy was walking down the beach and he sees a starfish and he throws it in the water and sees another one, kind of throws it in the water, and old man sees him doing that and kind of walks up to him kind of snidely and says, millions of starfish every day wash up on the beach. Why are you throwing them back in? What you're doing doesn't matter. And the boy looks down and picks up another one and tosses it in the ocean. And he says, it mattered to that one. So it has to happen at all levels. It starts with us. There's no doubt about it. Because this is another epidemic, another pandemic.
So haydenscorner.org, if that's is that the best place for people to go to learn more about your work and Hayden, and then also watch the documentary?
Best place. We're also on Instagram and Facebook, and I post photos about Hayden, and I give tips and tricks. And sometimes it's just more something. Sometimes it's just me posting photos of Hayden because it just makes me feel good remembering. I just like seeing that little kid smile.
Yeah, he has a smile that you remember. It sticks with you too. Yeah. Thanks so much, Brad, for sharing. I do believe that your story is going to help a lot of other kids out there and a lot of families. And I know it's not easy to do, but I want to thank you for coming on, and I want to thank our viewers for listening. Definitely check out haydenscorner.org. Brad's a great guy, great family, and he's doing a lot of great work. So watch the documentary, share it, have those conversations with your kids, and tune in next time to the Trial Site News Podcast.